what point did we think the show might go beyond KTMA and maybe be successful?
We knew we had a following, that people were very dedicated to the show, although I don't know if I necessarily believed it.
And then it was, again, one of those weird planets line up sort of situations.
There was this guy named Roger Nygard, and Roger Nygard's the guy who did Trekkies. He's a filmmaker now. But he was a guy from Minneapolis, and he had been out in LA, and I ran into him. I think he was working as an agent with Buddy Mora's company. And out of the blue, he just called me and he said, hey, I saw your show, and you know, they're starting this thing called the Comedy Channel.
Cable television was just coming into its own.
The executive at the head of the channel was a guy I knew named Stu Smiley, who I had worked for like 2 years earlier on Jerry Seinfeld's first special, which I wrote with Jerry Seinfeld, called Stand Up Confidential. And so it was really easy to call him and go, hey, Stu, I got this show in Minneapolis, can I show it to you?
Here we had this 2-hour show, you know, that was fully developed to the extent that, you know, it was a 20-episode pilot we did for them, essentially.
And so we cut together like a 4-minute cell tape with the best moments of the different movies and great visuals from like the Gamera movies and our best riffs and our press, and put it together in a package. And we flew to New York and we showed it to him. And it was like one of those things where he started making calls right away, like right after he looked at it, he started calling people. Like, we really felt like we had hit a nerve, because when an executive starts behaving like that, you go, oh, this is good.
If you're going to do business with a company like HBO, they won't do business with you personally. They need a corporate entity, and that's clearly what we needed to do.
And he said, you know, the way I look at it is it should be 50-50. Otherwise, one guy's working for the other guy. And I said, that makes total sense.
I do know that they went to bat for us all by making sure that we could keep our copyright and own the show, which is an incredibly rare thing these days.
They must not have been reading their television 101 handbooks or something, but they were paying us so little money. Rick Lead finally said, tell you what, they'll do the show, but they get the copyright, and the gods were with us, and they gave us the copyright, which was just extraordinary. At the beginning, Comedy Central, or the Comedy Channel, wanted to change almost every aspect of the show.
We didn't really understand it at the time, but their whole model was to make it like MTV. Like, there would just be hosts who are setting up, you know, funny movie clips.
We'd get these notes about, can you make it shorter? Can you do more than just a movie? Can you throw in some other stuff that we have?
And we didn't quite understand that. We were like a little worried that they were going to go, oh, yeah, you guys are going to be hosting movie clips. And that's probably what they were thinking.
And we kept saying no. And one of the most wonderful things you can have, a great position of power to have in that business, is the ability to say no to anything, because then you can negotiate and you can hopefully get what you want.
Instead, they started talking about, you know, will you fly to New York for 5 days and shoot the show?
They had built a cool office that was wrapped around the studio, and all the walls were open. So you had all the noise of the office, all the executives walking around.
We said, oh, your ceilings are only 12 feet high. We use puppets. Can't do it. It'll never work, because we got guys in a puppet trench, you know. Meanwhile, you know, KTMA, I doubt if the ceiling was any more than 12 feet high. But they kind of go, oh, they sound like they know what they're talking about, 12 feet, oh, yeah, okay.
So by sticking to our guns, and because we had a mad dog agent at the time, a guy named Rick Lead, who kept saying, you guys are idiots and fools if you don't accept this show, and was really combative, we were eventually able to wait them out.
I think more than anything, they were so busy having to have this task of getting the network up and running. And we were just kind of self-contained, and we represented 90 minutes finished, and they just started putting it on.
I invented this, which is Junk Drawer Helper. It comes in a little bag, and it's got a few of those items that are great for starting a junk drawer. Pretty soon you'll accumulate a whole drawer full of stuff.
The executives at the channel really left us alone. You know, no one wanted to come to the Midwest because it was cold.
And if they do come, they get the biggest sport utility vehicle they can with four-wheel drive and studded tires because they think they're going to die on the freeway between the airport and the TV station.
You know, we were left to our own devices. We entertained ourselves, and I think that really came through in the product.
First, spaceship on Venus.
Yeah,
Oh, that's
cool.
nice.
Hey,
Come back here. Oh, at least this will be here. Come on. We'll go.
Grab this one.
Grab it. See if it.
The only note they ever gave us was, we can't see the silhouettes in a black and white movie. You have to change the color of the silhouettes. And we said, well, that's like absurd because shadows are black. And they said, just change it. That was the one thing they made us do. And so there's a couple, one or two black and white movies that have these stupid green silhouettes. And finally, the guy who was doing our kind of final mix said, oh, you know how to fix that? You just blew the black and white movie. And so that's all we did. We blew the black and white movie. Suddenly the silhouettes were fine.
Probably the major change, most obvious change when we went to the Comedy Channel was that we could now have budget to write the show.
We can't go on just riffing and kind of coming up with the, you know, what Josh would call first thought theater, which is just kind of whatever comes to mind.
There's something really intimate and great about pure improvisation. On the other hand, now we needed to, you know, fully engage people on a national level.
We had a lot more money, which was still not a lot of money in TV money, but it was enough for us to expand the sets and build more, elaborate structure to support the show.
I remember coming in and seeing Kevin like hanging from the ceiling, just hanging a light grid up, and I just remember being really impressed, like, holy cow, we're like really in this deep. So there was Trace and myself and Josh, and we were going, let's bring in another guy.
And I knew Mike from the Minneapolis stand-up scene, and he was a guy who came up maybe a year or two behind me.
We had done stand-up circuits together, driven to all points north in the middle of nowhere, and I knew that he was working on the show.
So we went down to Williams Pub, which is one of the many stand-up clubs in Minneapolis at that time. And Mike was there doing bits, and the thing I remember about Mike is he seemed completely uninhibited and seemed to not really care what the audience was thinking. He was amusing himself, and it was really cool. It was really neat what he was doing.
So he said, you should come down and we need someone to type, so could you are you a good typist? And I wasn't really, but I said, yeah, I had taken typing in grade school, so I'll give it a shot.
I don't even know whether he knew he was auditioning that night or not, but they went, yeah, bring him in. And unfortunately, it didn't work out for him.
Back then, this is 1989, the word processing programs were just horrible and confusing to use. So I would just cram after hours and be the only one who could run the computer. And so it was like, oh, we need Mike. And so that was my crafty way to make sure I was indispensable, was to learn the computer, the one computer that we had.
So he was brought in as a typist, and of course he was invited to throw in on the joke writing.
We just started rolling, and he fit in really well, and he, was like totally part of the thing.
Every time Mike would say something, he would break up the room. The whole room would bust up. He'd do one joke, and it would just be spot on, be perfect at the time, it was completely unrehearsed. And so for that to just generate spontaneously just seemed, like magic. I mean, the guy just had it going, and it was perfect. And it was really, it wasn't too long after we were going that it seemed like the perfect position for him to be our head writer.
To me, more than anything, that meant taking all our stuff and kind of putting it in order and making sure that it all fit.
I think the position of head writer sort of was like cat herder with this group, because you had this, amorphous group of writers who we'd go off and write sketches in different offices, sometimes in pairs and sometimes alone. and bring them together. And I think there was also ego, because everybody wanted to do the best they could and thought that what they were doing was really good. But we needed someone to sort of keep check on what it was we were doing. And that's a hard position when you're working with a lot of comics who bring their own styles and their own senses of humor into a room and to make it consistent. And I think that was part of what Mike would do, is that he could gently and diplomatically say, well, why don't we adjust it in this way or that way?
They had just been picked up for a second season, and once they got that information, they knew they were going to need a new writer because they knew Josh was leaving.
Frank is like a true character. I mean, there's a movie called Broadway Danny Rose, a Woody Allen movie about old Borscht Belt comedians, and like Frank stepped out of that film and came into our writing room. Just a hilarious guy with a persona that you would never find anywhere else. And so I'd known him for years in stand-up, and I suggested him for the show.
So Mike called me and said, we pretty much think you're the guy. And he didn't ask if I was available because he knew that I was. Wasn't like, I have more gigs in North Dakota that I have to do, so I don't think I could make it.
To replace Josh, we needed somebody with a real distinct look, and it was just like instant, and everyone wanted to write for that partnership right away.
I think the show continued to grow, and I certainly think, it didn't suffer from my loss. I think it benefited from my presence initially, but I think Frank was absolutely genius in his role.
Oh, by the way, Doctor, I forgot to tell you, the product placement people called me today. I told them in no uncertain terms, we never, ever, ever do product placements.
I wanted to have like an open architecture where anybody could participate, and they took advantage of that to the point where, when Josh left, Jim said, I think we should bring in Kevin.
Picked up the puppet, which had been vastly improved, and started playing with it, and tried to fill Josh's shoes. Big shoes. Guy's got big shoes.
The rest is history. Kevin came in, and it was like incredible.
Danger! Danger, Crow T-Robot! Danger! No, come on, Crow, you got me doing it now. Get a grip, boy. We have to remain rational. This is just one of the many sordid alien visitors that fly by, exchange dialogue with us for roughly 2.5 minutes, and then leaves. It's no big deal.
Well, here's the thing about Tom that I always like to reiterate, is that Tom wasn't just what I would do. Tom was the end result of all these, great writers in the writing room, writing jokes for him and building his character. So I feel like it was my responsibility to take all the writing and do what I could to, make that character come out.
Station on the moon. Professor Herringway from the United States makes a public statement about the famous meteor.
They started auditioning people, and I wrote a script, and I think that I kind of got what they were doing maybe before some of the other people, and so I got hired. I don't think it was any magic on my part. I just kind of, I get this,
I heard through the grapevine that they were looking for another writer, so I called Mike Nelson, and in my very Minnesota way, said, if it's okay with you, I am interested, but I don't want to be a bother. And then I hung up the phone.
She was a well-known comedian around Minneapolis and very talented. So it was just a matter of grabbing these people and trying them out in the writing room, and I was confident that Mary Jo would be excellent.
And they called me in for a trial period, and I was there for 2 weeks. And then I think they forgot that I was there, that they hadn't really hired me. So I went around to everyone and I said, thank you so much I was trying to be very courageous about it. I said, thank you so much for this trial run. I've really enjoyed it. And then all the partners got together for a quick meeting and they asked me to stay another 2 weeks. And then I think they really forgot, because after that I got hired.
Paul was also a find of mine, if I may say that, in that I was still working the comedy clubs, and those guys, again, had already kind of left at that point. And I went to just a dreadful open stage night.
I was introduced as the intelligent humor of Paul Chaplin, and oh, thank you. That'll definitely, set up the audience in a favorable way. But I mean, I was known to tell jokes about the Federal Reserve and even get a laugh.
And I just thought, this guy's great. He's able to, he had the confidence and everything to just go up there and do it in front of this sort of dreadfully drunk crowd. And so I persuaded him to write some scripts from home. And I think I gave him like 3 days lead time, and I said, could you turn in a script? Because I wasn't thinking.
I'm kind of an obsessive. And so I think I turned in these scripts that if there was any opportunity, I gotta think of a joke here, you know? And so there was a lot of, the first one I wrote for was Daddy-O. I remember it just seemed like, oh my God, I've reached nirvana. I'm writing jokes about Daddy-O. But it was a lot of fun, you know, and I got feedback pretty quickly that you know, they liked the scripts that were coming in.
And the poor guy like scribbled, you know, the entire time and sent in this mass of great jokes. And I realized after the fact I had tortured him, so I said, maybe just come on down and we'll see if we can get you a job here. So, and he fit right in right away.
Well, it always felt to me like I'd been, you know, promoted from the instructional league to at least AAA, like overnight. It was, wow.
Well, I think everybody had their skill set in their area that they would riff from.
We all had a similar sort of, you know, Monty Python background, and so it's hard to say where my mind fit exactly, but it was a good match.
Everyone had their little area that they had studied and brought to the table, and then you'd find someone that would click off what you were saying, and you go, oh, you were into that too, and then you know you could get a joke in if you wrote it knowing that that other person would back you up.
These movie scripts were huge. I mean, we'd end up with, you know, 750 jokes. We'd end up with 45 pages of script, and it had to be pared down.
We used 10 to 15% of the jokes that were offered and typed down. And not every joke that was offered was typed down.
Whatever we thought was funny ruled, you know, and we just went for that, and we made each other laugh a lot.
It was truly like sitting around with all the guys from college, like a fraternity house, and you were the girl, and you just tried to keep up and be funny.
The first day I showed up on the job, I was already in love. It was watching TV and sitting on big, comfortable couches.
Basically, we had all this space to fill up with ideas, and I think that's one of the things I'm most proud of, is just keeping that architecture open so anybody could drop in things that amuse them. And it led to just this big slush pile of ideas and jokes that people really reacted to.
It was pretty much, you know, come in the morning and spend one day just a pass through the movie.
We'd sit in a room, throw pencils at the ceiling.
First we would order lunch, and we would throw a ball around for a while. Then we would complain that lunch was taking a really long time to come.
We'd have a movie with a time code on it. Somebody would man the remote.
People yelling things out, and if it made people laugh, then it got written down.
Pause the tape, type it in. While they're typing it in, somebody would play off of that or think of something else, type those all in.
It was just filling it until it was full, and then getting on to the next one.
You just tried to throw out as many jokes as you can, and it was it was generally it was a pretty fun atmosphere.
We had a pretty strict discipline. We needed to get through the movie, I think, at least once by the end of the day.
And then we'd come in for a second day and do the whole thing over again, do it all again, and watch it again, and riff more comments, maybe look at scenes from a different approach, and come up with different kinds of lines, and do it all for a whole day again.
And then there was a process that evolved called line assign, where the movie was broken down into sections, and each writer would take a piece and polish it.
And then go through the riffs and assign the lines to people and choose which we would think would be the best riffs, and put it in a script and assign the line and put it with the time code.
And a rule we had was that you didn't take down the sound of a movie in order to fit a joke in. The joke had to actually fit in organically in the movie.
And then after that, it was kind of just refine it. The sketches didn't get a lot of, you know, they were pretty haphazard.
Is it supposed to do that?
Yeah, that's the way the XT communicates. He talks in foam.
That was where a lot more of the passion was for those, you know, sketches, and that's where the most arguments happened, and it ended up being, it was so insignificant.
89% of our audience just didn't care about the sketches. I think we all understood that, but there was a lot of care went into those, and there's a lot of really good sketches that were written.
I mean, I don't want to sell it short, but it was important, but it was, you know, that's where kind of the creative stuff came to ahead.
And eventually a script was put together.
When we had that script ready, we'd before we filmed, we'd rehearse it, and then in the rehearsal of it, more lines would be added, or you know, or someone would question a line, say, "Oh, is that really that funny? Can't we do better?" You know, or maybe someone at that moment would be inspired and come up with a new line, and we'd put that in.
But when we went to shoot, it was usually a one-take affair. I can remember maybe a handful of times we stopped the tape for one reason or another.
Then it was all pretty locked in terms of what the riffing was going to be.
Our signals are reaching the planet, but so far there's no reply. We'll keep you informed.
Hugs and kisses, Bunny.
Look out for the box spring!
The popularity started growing. People thought it was really cool. It was like nothing else that was on that channel, and at the time it was like nothing else that was on television.
And then we started getting national press. We started getting really great notices in Time magazine and Newsweek and People. And
we were anointed by Tom Shales of the Washington Post as, "You are now cool." You know, Richard Corliss came down. "You are now cool." The gods came down from the heavens and declared us cool. So suddenly we became cool, and you know, like any network, what's cool is going to stay on.
Even then, we'd go to the mall and buy a Time magazine and sit at the mall with our bad Chinese mall food and read this article and, yeah, I guess that's us. And then we'd go play video games.
Midway through the 5th season that Joel left the series.
It was kind of confusing at the time why all of this was going on and why, you know, why would you want to leave a successful show that's sculpted around you?
I felt like I was losing my role as the creative leader or the artistic leader of Mystery Science Theater. And so it just got more and more uncomfortable after that, to the point where I just felt like, you know what, I should go.
We had auditions for other hosts.
I think there was a little bit of sort of discussion as to who might host it, but Mike was pretty obviously the choice.
We must have had 3 or 4 different people come in. And I think it just reinforced for us how right Mike was for that role.
He'd done a lot of characters on the show. He was damn funny. He was a different twist on the hapless dupe in outer space than Joel, because he was, you know, a little bit more of a aw shucks sort of guy, avuncular, big, you know, dopey sort of, sorry Mike.
He does a mean Urkel, and I think that's what pushed me over the edge. That and his De Niro impersonation is pretty great too. It was pretty smooth, and you know, I think, you know, obviously Mike did a great job in that role, and the series continued on for another 5 years.